When we think of propaganda, we often imagine state-controlled media, brainwashed citizens, and dictators who silence dissent. North Korea, the Soviet Union, Russia, Nazi Germany. Places where the government controls every word, every thought, every belief. It's easy to roll your eyes at such blatant propaganda and wonder how people could fall for it. In the West, we like to believe that we're free thinkers and that our opinions are our own. What if they're not? What if the things we believe, the wars we support, the products we buy, the leaders we trust, aren't based on facts, but on a carefully crafted illusion? The West has perfected propaganda. It's more subtle, sophisticated, and far harder to recognize. It doesn't shout at you from a dictator's podium. It whispers from your TV, your newsfeed, your favorite movies. And that's what makes it quite so dangerous. The greatest trick of propaganda is convincing you that you're too smart to fall for it. In 2025, it's clear that governments play a significant role in the media that we consume. But back in the 1950s, things were very different. There was once a certain respect for the news, a trustworthiness that seems absent today. During the Cold War, the CIA launched Operation Mockingbird, a covert program designed to infiltrate and manipulate Western media. By the 1950s, the agency had placed hundreds of journalists on its payroll, embedding them in some of America's most trusted news outlets: The New York Times, The Washington Post, Time Magazine, and many, many others. Their job was not to report the truth. It was to shape it. The CIA planted stories, controlled narratives, and filtered the information the public received, particularly around foreign policy, war, and political adversaries. Journalists who refused to comply were blacklisted, intimidated, or quietly removed from the industry. Some media moguls were fully aware and complicit, while others had no idea their newsrooms were compromised. Either way, the result was the same: a press that served the government, not the people. When the program was exposed in the 1970s, public outrage led the government to claim that it had been shut down. But did it really end? Or did it just evolve? Today, former intelligence officials are regulars on major news networks, presenting themselves as neutral analysts while subtly reinforcing government narratives. Press releases from government agencies are often repeated word for word by mainstream outlets with little independent investigation. Have you ever noticed how every major news network pushes the same talking points at the same time? It's not an accident. It is a system designed to control public perception, not through outright censorship, but by curating the information that we see. Because the most effective propaganda isn't the news you're forced to watch, it's the news you trust without questioning. In the summer of 1964, tensions between the United States and North Vietnam were already rising. The US had been quietly escalating its involvement in the region, supporting the South Vietnamese government in its fight against communist forces. But the American public wasn't convinced this was their war to fight. That changed on August 2, 1964, when news broke that a US naval destroyer, the USS Maddox, had been attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. Just 2 days later, another attack was reported, this time a full-scale assault on both the Maddox and another US destroyer, the USS Turner Joy. The Johnson administration wasted no time in framing the incident as an unprovoked act of aggression, portraying it as proof that North Vietnam was a direct threat to US forces. President Lyndon B. Johnson went before Congress, urging swift action. Within days, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was passed, granting him broad military powers to wage war in Vietnam without an official declaration. The war machine roared to life, and the US was suddenly plunged into what would become one of the most brutal and divisive conflicts in American history. There was just one problem: the second attack never happened. Years later, declassified documents and first-hand accounts exposed the truth. The initial confrontation on August 2nd was a minor skirmish, not the outright assault it had been portrayed as, and the second attack, a complete fabrication. Radar operators had misread signals, mistaking phantom blips for enemy ships. By the time doubts surfaced, the decision to go to war had already been made. Johnson himself privately admitted, "For all I know, our Navy was shooting at whales." The media played its part perfectly, running with the official narrative, drumming up national outrage, and turning a manufactured event into an undeniable justification for war. With headlines screaming about communist aggression, the American people were led to believe they had no choice but to respond with force, and what followed was nearly a decade of bloodshed. The Vietnam War claimed the lives of over 58,000 American troops and left millions of Vietnamese civilians dead. Towns were burned, forests drowned in Agent Orange, and entire generations scarred by a war built on a deliberate lie. By the time the truth emerged, it was too late. The damage was done, and those responsible faced no consequences. In the wake of 9/11, fear gripped the world. The United States, still reeling from the deadliest terror attack in history, was desperate for a target. The Bush administration found its focus in Iraq, a country ruled by Saddam Hussein, a longtime US adversary. But there was a problem. Iraq had no connection to 9/11. The American public wouldn't support an invasion without a justification, so a new threat was manufactured, one designed to spark fear, demand action, and make war inevitable. The world was told that Iraq was secretly stockpiling weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, deadly nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons capable of wiping out entire cities. US officials claimed Saddam had an active nuclear weapons program, had acquired materials to build a bomb, and that if nothing was done, those weapons could soon be in the hands of terrorists. Quote, "We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud." That's National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. The message was clear. Act now or suffer the consequences later. It wasn't just politicians selling this war either. The media echoed every claim without question, plastering headlines with phrases like Saddam's hidden arsenal and the Iraq WMD threat. Television networks paraded so-called experts who all agreed that Iraq was a ticking time bomb. The phrase weapons of mass destruction became synonymous with Saddam Hussein's regime. Fear became policy, and policy became war. In March 2003, the US invaded Iraq. Shock and awe. Cities were bombed, government buildings reduced to rubble, and within weeks, Saddam's forces collapsed. But when US and coalition troops searched for these deadly weapons, they found nothing. No chemical stockpiles, no secret nuclear facilities, no evidence that Iraq had been anywhere close to developing WMDs. The intelligence had been exaggerated, distorted, or outright fabricated. Later investigations revealed that the evidence had never been solid to begin with. The Bush administration had relied on dubious sources, cherry-picked intelligence, and outright lies to justify the war. By 2004, even the CIA's own report confirmed that Iraq had no active WMD program. By then, though, Iraq was already destroyed. The war led to the deaths of over 200,000 Iraqi civilians, with millions more displaced. The US lost over 4,500 troops, and trillions of dollars were funneled into a conflict that should have never happened. Meanwhile, corporations like Halliburton and military contractors made billions from defense contracts, profiting from the devastation. Despite the truth coming out, no one was held accountable. The same media outlets that had aggressively pushed the WMD narrative simply moved on, never acknowledging their role in shaping public opinion. The war had already been fought, the damage already done. The WMD myth is a textbook example of how propaganda doesn't just spread lies, it shapes history, it manufactures consent, and it justifies destruction. By the time people realized the truth, it was already too late. Propaganda is not just about war or politics, it's about control. And in the West, nothing controls people quite like advertising. And we like to believe we make our own choices, that the things we buy reflect our personal tastes. But what if most of those desires weren't actually your own? What if they were carefully engineered, not by free will, but by corporations that have mastered the art of psychological manipulation? Modern advertising is not just about selling products, it's about selling emotions, identities, lifestyles. It preys on insecurities, whispering that happiness, success, and love are things that you can buy. Decades of psychological research have been weaponized to bypass rational thinking, targeting the deepest corners of our subconscious. Ads don't just inform, they create a need, shaping our perception of what is essential and what is not. Luxury brands, they don't sell bags, they don't sell watches, they sell status and exclusivity, convincing you that owning their products will elevate you above the crowd. Fast food chains don't just sell burgers and fries, they sell nostalgia, childhood memories, comfort. And beauty products don't just promise clearer skin, they suggest that you're not good enough without them. Every major brand attaches a feeling to its product, ensuring that when you consume it, it isn't just an object, it's a piece of your identity. And then there's the subliminal messaging and behavioral nudging, the more invisible, insidious side of advertising. Ever wonder why your phone seems to know exactly what you've been thinking about buying? That's because advertisers aren't just selling to you, they're tracking you. Every search, every click, and pause on a post is analyzed, feeding you ads at the perfect moment when your emotions are most vulnerable. Social media algorithms amplify this effect, surrounding you with content that nudges you ever so slightly toward making the decision they want you to make. Perhaps the most disturbing part is that we often don't even realize that it's happening. The most effective propaganda isn't the kind that's forced upon you, it's the kind that makes you believe it was your idea all along. Advertising's evolved beyond persuasion. It has become a global system of psychological control, shaping not just our spending habits, but our desires, our self-worth, even our sense of reality itself. When we think of propaganda, we usually imagine government broadcasts, state-run news, censored information. But what if one of the most powerful mind control tools doesn't come from politicians or the press, but from Hollywood? For decades, the US military and intelligence agencies have directly shaped the films we watch. The Pentagon and CIA have worked behind the scenes on thousands of movies and TV shows, rewriting scripts, consulting on production, and deciding what does and doesn't get made. In exchange for their cooperation, filmmakers gain access to military bases, aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and advanced weaponry. But there's a catch. If the military's involved, the script must be approved. Any scene that makes the US military look bad, that gets cut. This is why American war movies almost always depict heroic soldiers, noble missions, righteous battles. Think about Top Gun, Black Hawk Down, Zero Dark 30, American Sniper. They're all heavily influenced, if not directly supported by the Pentagon. Even superhero movies like Iron Man were military-approved projects designed to boost recruitment and shape public perception of the armed forces. These films do not just tell stories, they manufacture consent, making war look necessary, justified, even exciting. But the real power of the system isn't just making the military look good, it's shaping public opinion on war itself. When a new conflict looms, Hollywood conveniently releases a wave of patriotic films, reinforcing the idea that military intervention isn't just an option, it's a moral duty. After 9/11, American audiences were flooded with movies glorifying the war on terror, subtly nudging them to support real-life conflicts in the Middle East. The message was clear: war's not just necessary, it's heroic. And it doesn't stop with movies. TV shows like Homeland, Jack Ryan, NCIS, 24, The Last Ship, they portray the CIA, FBI, and military as the good guys, always fighting the right fight. The deeper truth, the dark history of covert operations, government overthrows, war crimes, and intelligence failures, that's rarely shown, is it? So the next time you watch a war movie or a spy thriller, ask yourself, whose story's being told here? And whose story is being erased? Because if the Pentagon is signing off on the script, it's not just entertainment, it's recruitment, it's public relations, it's propaganda at its finest. Now, we're told that capitalism is about freedom, opportunity, and choice, that anyone can succeed if they just work hard enough. But step back and look at how the financial system truly operates, and a bit of a different picture emerges, doesn't it? The game's rigged, and most people are set to lose before they even begin. The 2008 financial crisis, that's a great example. In the years leading up to the crash, banks knowingly handed out risky subprime mortgages, gambling with people's livelihoods while raking in record profits. When the system collapsed, millions lost their homes, their jobs, savings, and the bankers responsible, they weren't punished. They were bailed out with taxpayer money. The very institutions that crashed the economy were saved and made even richer, while ordinary people were left to rebuild from the wreckage. CEOs walked away with golden parachutes, and Wall Street just carried on as if nothing had happened. And this isn't just some one-time event. It's how the system is designed. Debt is the invisible chain that keeps people trapped. From student loans to credit cards to mortgages, the average person spends a lifetime just working to pay off debts that never seem to go away. Meanwhile, a tiny financial elite control the global economy, shaping policy, lobbying governments, and ensuring real wealth stays concentrated in the hands of the few. Walk into a grocery store and it looks like an endless variety of brands and products. But at the top, just a handful of corporations control the entire industry. The same's true for media, pharmaceuticals, and finance. What appears to be competition It's really just an oligarchy disguised as a free market. And then there's inflation, the silent thief. Year after year, the cost of living rises, wages stagnate, and your purchasing power shrinks, no matter how hard you seem to work. Central banks print money at will, fueling inflation, while telling the public to tighten their belts. The rich get richer as assets appreciate, while the working class find their paycheck buying less and less. The reality is that the system's not broken, it's working exactly as intended. It creates just enough opportunity to keep people hopeful while ensuring that real power and wealth never leave the hands of the elite. The greatest modern trick of finance? Well, that's convincing the masses they're free, while keeping them chained to debt, rising costs, and an economic treadmill that they can never escape. We turn on the news to stay informed, to make sense of the world, to understand what's happening all around us. But modern news is not about informing. It's about controlling emotions, shaping narratives, and keeping you glued to the screen. The 24-hour news cycle thrives on one thing above all: fear. Fear keeps people engaged, distracted, and most importantly, easily manipulated. Even when crime rates are falling, you'll still see endless stories about murders, kidnappings, and violent attacks. Protests happen. Some networks glorify them as heroic acts of democracy, others paint them as dangerous uprisings. It's not about the facts, it's about which version of reality best serves their agenda. Have you ever noticed how different networks report the same events in completely opposite ways? And that's not an accident. They aren't just delivering information, they're telling you how to feel about it. Some push left-wing propaganda, others push right-wing propaganda, but they all have one thing in common: they thrive on division. A divided, angry audience is an engaged audience. Engaged audiences mean higher ratings, more ad revenue, more influence. The more outraged you are, the more you keep watching. And then there's manufactured consent, the process of making people demand things they would normally oppose. Want to justify a war? Flood the news with stories about enemies' cruelty. Or want the public to accept new surveillance laws? Drown them in fear about terrorism until they just beg the government to step in. And before you know it, people aren't just accepting government actions, they're demanding them. And the worst part is that it works. Studies show that people who watch more news are often more misinformed than those who don't. Not because they're not smart, but because they've been emotionally manipulated into believing narratives designed to control them. Real journalism, it seeks truth, but modern news, it's not about truth. It's about keeping you emotional, keeping you divided, too distracted to question the bigger picture. The more time you spend glued to the screen, the less time you spend thinking for yourself. From the time that we're children, we're told that education's the key to success, that school exists to teach us how to think critically, analyze information, and prepare for the future. But what if the real purpose of the education system isn't to create free thinkers, but obedient workers? Think about how we're actually taught things in school. We memorize facts, we follow instructions, and take standardized tests. But we rarely learn how to question authority, change the system, or think independently. The curriculum is narrowly controlled, focusing on subjects that reinforce the status quo while ignoring uncomfortable truths. Schools teach us about wars and victories, but rarely about government corruption and failures. We learn about economics, but not how banks manipulate markets or how the elite hoards wealth. We study history, but much of it is sanitized, whitewashed, or just conveniently omitted. The system is designed to produce compliant individuals who follow rules, meet deadlines, accept hierarchies without question. Creativity, independent thought, non-conformity, those are discouraged. By the time students leave school, they've spent over a decade being conditioned to obey, conform, and never challenge authority. And let's not ignore the debt trap of higher education. College tuition has skyrocketed, saddling students with crushing debt before they're even entering the workforce. Meanwhile, universities have become more about profit than education, churning out graduates who spend decades paying off loans while the corporate and financial elite reap the rewards. The result? A population too burdened by debt, stress, and financial survival to ever question the system that put them there in the first place. True education should empower people, challenge power structures, and encourage free thought. Instead, we have a system that trains people to fit neatly into society without ever realizing they've been programmed. The best form of control is the kind that you never even notice. So look, as we reach the bottom of this pit of brainwashing, what a surprise to find the bullshit artist supreme, Big Pharma. We are told that modern medicine is about saving lives and improving health. But behind the white coats and pharmaceutical ads lies a far more sinister reality, and that's that profit comes before people. The pharmaceutical industry is not about medicine, it's about money, control, psychological manipulation. Drug companies spend billions on advertising, convincing people they need a pill for every problem. Feeling anxious, depressed, trouble sleeping? There's a drug for that. And once you start, you're a lifelong customer. But here's what they don't tell you. Many of these drugs don't cure anything, they just manage symptoms, keeping you dependent on medication for life. Conditions that could be treated through lifestyle changes, diet, or therapy are instead met with a prescription pad and a monthly bill. And when a drug's side effects create new health problems, well, there's a drug for that too. Take the opioid crisis. For years, pharmaceutical companies lied about the addictive nature of painkillers, pushing drugs like OxyContin onto the public. Doctors were assured these medications were safe. Patients trusted their prescriptions, and soon, millions were hooked. When addiction rates skyrocketed and overdoses became a crisis, the same companies that caused the problem walked away with billions, while the victims were left to suffer. And then there's the way that fear is weaponized. Every year, we're bombarded with new health scares, each one requiring a new vaccine, treatment, or drug. The media plays along, churning out stories designed to make people anxious about their health, leading them straight into the arms of Big Pharma. The result? A society that doesn't just accept medication, but one that demands it. Western medicine has made incredible advancements, but the industry itself, it's not designed to create healthy people, it's designed to produce permanent patients. The more sick people there are, the more money they make. And as long as the public trusts that pharmaceutical companies have their best interests at heart, the cycle of profit and dependency will never end. So look, propaganda's not always loud. It doesn't always come from dictators, military parades, censored state media. Sometimes it comes from the news you trust, the education you receive, the entertainment you consume, and the ads that shape your desires. The West's perfected propaganda, not by forcing people to believe something, but by making them think that they arrived at those beliefs on their own. The greatest trick of modern mind control is that it doesn't feel like mind control. You're not locked in a prison cell, but in an invisible cage of carefully crafted narratives. The wars we fight, the money we chase, the media we consume, it's all designed to keep us divided, distracted, and dependent. And the more we believe we're immune to propaganda, the easier we are to manipulate. Thank you for watching.